the last section I want to talk about is politics. You know, again, I mentioned this covenantal theology. The covenant deals with all aspects of human experience, and we live political life as well. We live in societies that is governed by politics, so they dealt with politics as well. And the Puritans believed that government power could only legitimately be exercised with the consent of the governed. Now, this is a famous phrase from the Declaration of Independence, but almost 140 years before the Declaration of Independence was written, John Winthrop wrote in a defense of the order of the court made in 1637, "It is clearly agreed by all that the case of safety and welfare was the original cause or occasion for commonwealth, and many families subjecting themselves to rulers and laws. From the premises that arise these conclusions, no commonwealth can be founded without free consent." So the consent of the governed was a understanding that goes back into the early Puritan experiment. And they got this understanding, again, from the biblical Israelites who came out of Egypt and into Canaan. And this was, again, I mentioned earlier that the Puritans saw this parallel between themselves. And so when the Israelites came out of Canaan and into the Promised Land, there was, they set up a federation of, tribal federation of judges. It was before there was a king, you had these federation of tribes, and they were ruled by these judges. And actually, I'll probably go into that in a little bit more detail in our time, but the federation was set up by a recommendation to Moses from his brother-in-law Jethro. And this recommendation is pinpointed by just a second here, Puritan minister Thomas Hooker. And he gave this sermon in 1638. And this sermon was the basis of the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which was the first constitution for modern democracy in modern times. So in his sermon, he's talking about this verse in Deuteronomy 1:13, where it says, "Take ye wise men in understanding, and known among the tribes, and I will make them rulers over you." So this is the message that God gave to Jethro to tell Moses, because Moses was the people were coming to Moses and he was judging them, and then Jethro says, "What is this thing you're doing to your people?" And then he says, "Well, they come to me and I judge them." He says, "Oh, this is not good. You're going to wear yourself out and wear your people out." And so this is the advice he gave him. And so Hooker interpreted "take ye" to mean some form of democratic selection. And so representative government through the people's selection was based upon this interpretation of Jethro's advice to Moses. Take ye these people, and I will make them rulers. And so he's telling Moses to tell this to the people. So the people chose their representatives. They had a federation. You had family level, and there's tribes, and eventually you have these judges, and they were selected by the people. So this was understood by Puritan pastors as indicating that God required some form of constitutional democratic republic where the rulers were selected by the people. Because they had just come out of a society in Egypt where the ruler was considered like a king, like a god. The pharaoh was like a god. And so the ultimate rule only came from God himself. So the human rulers are not someone that rule by divine decree. They're selected by the people. Now, at the time of the Revolution, this view had become so prevalent among the colonists that Thomas Paine, he was a famous pamphleteer, and he wrote this famous pamphlet, you probably heard of it, called Common Sense. And this was widely distributed at the time of the Revolution, and he used this understanding in there. He referred to the verses in 1 Samuel, denunciations of monarchy. And they talked about in Gideon, in the book of Gideon, there was also a denunciation of monarchy in Gideon. And these examples were in Thomas Paine's Common Sense. So by that time, the warnings of Samuel about the abuse of power on the part of a monarchy was considered by the Puritans and by a lot of them to apply to government in general, not just a monarchy, but government in general. They're very suspicious of government power, and they had been for quite some time. And this suspicion was given voice to by George Washington, where he says, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like a fire, a troublesome servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. In other words, do not allow the government to take on a role beyond what it was meant to be. And the whole purpose of the U.S. Constitution was to limit the government to certain particular roles. And many Christians contrasted, particularly the Quakers, contrasted not only government force with reason and eloquence, but with the Christian idea of love. And some of them went so far as saying the government has no the state, self-government, family government, yes, has legitimacy. Some of them didn't even, the Quakers didn't even believe that the state government, where you use force and police force and stuff like that, had no legitimacy at all. But eventually, there was a little bit, well, we need, in principle and ideals, a theoretical ideal, yeah, we can understand that. But in practical reality, we need a government when we need to be limited. So they were very, very suspicious of the institution of government. Not only as a threat to individual liberty, but it usurped the power of these voluntary associations of civil society, which was supposed to make up the fabric of the social order. And that pretty much, in a nutshell, is the overview of the British nation.